Rome, 29 BC. The streets are packed with hundreds of thousands of spectators. At the center of the procession walk two children, a boy and a girl, twins, just 11 years old. They're dressed as the sun and the moon, a cruel mockery of their names, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. But no one's laughing, because these children can barely walk. The golden chains wrapped around their small bodies are so heavy that they keep stumbling, falling, being dragged forward by Roman soldiers while the crowd watches. Behind them, carried on a platform, is a wax effigy of their mother, Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, depicted clutching the asp that killed her, frozen forever in the moment of her death. These children will never see their mother again. They'll never return to Egypt. They'll never sit on the thrones that were promised to them. And the youngest, a 6-year-old named Ptolemy Philadelphus, he isn't even in the procession. He may already be dead. No one bothered to record what happened to him. This is what Rome did to Cleopatra's family. But what happened in those final days, the days before Cleopatra's death, is far more disturbing than anything you learned in school. It wasn't just defeat. It was systematic humiliation, psychological torture, and the deliberate destruction of everything she loved. Let me show you. To understand Cleopatra's final days, we need to go back 1 year. September 2nd, 31 BC. The Battle of Actium. Cleopatra and Mark Antony had assembled one of the largest fleets the Mediterranean had ever seen. 500 warships, tens of thousands of soldiers, the combined might of Egypt and Rome's eastern provinces. Against them stood Octavian, Julius Caesar's adopted son and heir, with his brilliant admiral, Marcus Agrippa. The battle lasted only a few hours. It was a massacre. Antony's ships were larger, heavier, slower. Agrippa's lighter vessels ran circles around them. One by one, Antony's commanders defected. His soldiers surrendered without fighting. His entire fleet was either captured or at the bottom of the sea. Cleopatra, watching from her royal barge behind the battle line, saw her entire future collapse in a single afternoon. She turned her 60 Egyptian ships around and fled for Alexandria. Antony followed her. He abandoned his army, his reputation, his honor, everything, to be with her. For the next year, they waited in Alexandria for the end. They knew it was coming. Octavian was methodical. He was patient. He was taking his time. During this period, the couple reportedly dissolved their famous Society of Inimitable Livers, the club they'd founded for endless parties and debauchery. They replaced it with something darker, the Companions to Death, a society of people who had agreed to die together. Cleopatra began building her mausoleum, a massive 2-story structure on the palace grounds. She filled it with treasure, gold, silver, gems, precious spices, and made sure everyone knew she had installed wooden beams and kindling throughout. If Octavian tried to take her alive, she would burn everything, including herself. In the summer of 30 BC, Octavian's forces finally surrounded Alexandria. Antony tried one last desperate attack on August 1st. His cavalry charged Octavian's tired troops outside the city. For a brief moment, it looked like victory. Then, his navy surrendered. His cavalry defected. His infantry threw down their weapons and walked over to Octavian's side. Antony stood on the walls of Alexandria and watched his entire army abandon him. The men he'd led for years. The soldiers who'd fought with him across the Mediterranean, they looked up at him, shrugged, and joined the enemy. He stumbled back to the palace, raving that Cleopatra had betrayed him, that she'd made a secret deal with Octavian, that this was all her fault. Then came the message. Cleopatra's servants told him the queen was dead. She had killed herself in her mausoleum rather than be captured. We don't know why she sent this false message. Maybe she was testing his loyalty. Maybe she thought it would buy her time to negotiate with Octavian. Maybe she genuinely planned to die and changed her mind. Whatever the reason, Antony's response was immediate. He turned to his slave Eros and ordered him to run him through with his sword. Eros had sworn an oath to kill his master rather than let him be captured alive. Eros drew his sword, raised it high, and then plunged it into his own chest instead. Antony, watching his slave die rather than kill him, stabbed himself in the stomach. But Roman soldiers don't die easily. The wound was agonizing, but not immediately fatal. As he lay there bleeding on his bed, another messenger arrived. Cleopatra was alive. She wanted to see him. His servants carried his dying body through the streets to Cleopatra's mausoleum. The doors were sealed. She refused to open them, fearing Roman soldiers would rush in. So they hoisted Antony's body up the side of the building with ropes, hauling him through a window. Plutarch describes the scene. Cleopatra and her two handmaidens, straining with all their might, struggling to lift Antony's heavy body as he reached up toward them, covered in his own blood. The spectators below watching in horror as the dying general was slowly dragged up the wall. He died in Cleopatra's arms. His last words, according to Plutarch, were advice. Don't pity him, remember the good times, and trust Gaius Proculeius, one of Octavian's men, to treat her fairly. That last piece of advice would prove disastrously wrong. Octavian entered Alexandria without resistance. The city had no army left, no fleet, no one to defend it. His first priority, Cleopatra. More specifically, Cleopatra's treasure. Octavian was in debt. The civil wars had drained Rome's treasury. He had promised fortunes to his soldiers and veterans, and here was Cleopatra, sitting on the accumulated wealth of the Ptolemaic dynasty. 3 centuries of gold, gems, and plunder from across the ancient world. If she burned it, his entire victory would be hollow. Octavian sent Gaius Proculeius, the man Antony had trusted, to negotiate with Cleopatra through the sealed door of her mausoleum. She demanded only one thing: safety for her children. She would give up everything, her throne, her treasure, her life, if her children could live. Proculeius reported back to Octavian, then returned for a second meeting. This time, while Proculeius distracted Cleopatra at the door, 2 servants climbed up the back of the mausoleum, the same window through which Antony had been hauled. They burst into the chamber and grabbed Cleopatra before she could react. According to Plutarch, she tried to stab herself with a dagger hidden in her robes. They wrestled it away from her. They searched her body for hidden poison. They found none. She was now Octavian's prisoner. A few days later, Octavian came to see her. Cleopatra was in her quarters, essentially under house arrest, with a freedman named Epaphroditus assigned to guard her and prevent any suicide attempt. What happened in this meeting has been debated for 2,000 years. Roman sources, all written by Octavian's side, claimed Cleopatra tried to seduce him, that she attempted the same strategy that had worked on Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, that she threw herself at his feet, half-dressed, her hair disheveled, her breasts exposed. This is almost certainly propaganda. Octavian was 33 years old, famously cold and calculating, immune to the emotional outbursts that characterized other Roman leaders. And he had just conquered the most powerful woman in the Mediterranean. He didn't need to be seduced. He needed her alive, for now. What we know for certain is what Cleopatra said to him: "I will not be led in a triumph. El thriambeosomai." The Greek is unambiguous. She was telling him directly, "You can do whatever you want to me, but you will not drag me through the streets of Rome in chains." Octavian's response was cryptic. He told her that her life would be spared. He said nothing about what would happen after that. He gave her no information about her children, her kingdom, or her fate. He left her in the dark, on purpose. Cleopatra understood Roman triumphs. She had witnessed what happened to her own sister. 15 years earlier, her younger sister Arsinoe had rebelled against Cleopatra during the Alexandrian War. Julius Caesar defeated her and took her to Rome as a prisoner. In 46 BC, Arsinoe was paraded through the streets of Rome wrapped in golden chains. A teenage queen, dragged through a foreign city while hundreds of thousands of Romans jeered and threw things at her. The Roman crowd was supposed to celebrate. Instead, something unexpected happened. They felt pity. The sight of this young woman, clearly terrified, stumbling under the weight of her chains, moved them to tears. They cried out for mercy. Caesar, reading the crowd's reaction, made a rare decision. He spared her life. He sent her to live at the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus instead of executing her. But Cleopatra never forgot the threat Arsinoe posed. Years later, she convinced Mark Antony to have her sister assassinated on the steps of the temple. Murdered in a sacred sanctuary, an act so shocking that it scandalized even Rome. Now, Cleopatra faced the same fate. But she knew Octavian wouldn't make Caesar's mistake. She wouldn't be spared. And worse than her own humiliation was what would happen to her children. Cleopatra had 4 children. Caesarion, her son with Julius Caesar, was 17 years old. As Caesar's biological child, he was the most dangerous person in the Roman world to Octavian, who ruled based on being Caesar's adopted heir. 2 Caesars could not coexist. Cleopatra had sent Caesarion south to Upper Egypt, with plans to flee to India or Ethiopia. She was trying to save at least one of her children. The twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, were 11, and Ptolemy Philadelphus was 6. These were the children of Mark Antony. At the donations of Alexandria in 34 DC, Antony had publicly proclaimed them rulers of vast territories: Armenia, Media, Parthia, Cyrenaica, Libya, Phoenicia, Syria. The children had sat on silver thrones while their parents announced their glorious futures. Now those futures were ashes. Octavian's men tracked down Caesarion. They lured him back toward Alexandria with a false promise. Octavian would allow him to be king. The boy believed them. He was captured and executed on August 29th, 30 BC, less than 3 weeks after his mother's death. The philosopher Arrius Didymus reportedly advised Octavian, "Too many Caesars is not a good thing." The boy was killed without hesitation. Sometime around August 9th, Cleopatra learned the truth. A member of Octavian's staff, possibly sympathetic, possibly ordered to tell her, informed her that Octavian was leaving for Rome in a few days, and he was taking her with him. The triumph was scheduled. The chains were ready. The crowds were waiting. Cleopatra had perhaps 3 days left before she would be loaded onto a ship, taken across the Mediterranean, and paraded through Rome like an animal. On August 10th, or possibly August 12th, she asked permission to visit Antony's tomb. Octavian granted it. She poured libations for her dead lover, weeping over his ashes. Then she returned to her quarters. She bathed. She had a fine meal brought to her, including figs in a basket. She sent a sealed letter to Octavian. When he opened it, he found her final request, that she be buried beside Antony. Octavian immediately sent his guards to check on her. They found the doors locked. When they broke in, Cleopatra was lying on a golden couch, dressed in her royal robes, the symbols of Egyptian kingship arranged around her. Her crown was on her head. She was dead. Her two handmaidens, Iris and Charmian, were dead or dying beside her. Charmian, barely alive, was adjusting Cleopatra's crown one last time. When the soldiers demanded to know if this was right, if this was proper, Charmian replied, "Very right and fitting for a princess descended from so many kings." Then she collapsed and died. How did Cleopatra actually die? The truth is, we don't know. The famous story, the asp hidden in a basket of figs, comes from Roman sources written decades later. It's dramatic, it's symbolic. The asp, Egyptian cobra, was a symbol of divine royalty in Egypt. By allowing it to bite her, Cleopatra was supposedly becoming a goddess. But modern historians are skeptical. Egyptian cobras are large, 5 to 8 feet long, too big to smuggle in a basket of figs. Cobra venom takes hours to kill, and the death is agonizing. Nothing like the peaceful scene described by ancient writers. And how did one snake kill 3 women in a matter of minutes? More likely, Cleopatra used poison. She was known to have tested poisons on condemned prisoners, watching to see which ones killed most quickly and painlessly. Ancient sources mention a toxic ointment or a poison administered through a sharp pin or hairpin. Some historians go further. They suggest Octavian provided the poison himself, or at least allowed it to happen. He wanted Cleopatra dead. A living Cleopatra was a problem. She could rally resistance, become a martyr, or prove embarrassing if she survived the triumph and had to be executed publicly. A suicide was perfect. It made him look merciful. It eliminated his rival, and it gave him a dramatic story for his propaganda. The exotic queen, dying by snakebite, defeated by Roman virtue. Cassius Dio claims Octavian was outraged by Cleopatra's death because he couldn't parade her through Rome. But Octavian controlled the narrative. He wrote the histories, he built the monuments, and he benefited enormously from Cleopatra dying exactly when she did. With Cleopatra dead, Octavian moved quickly. Caesarion was executed. Egypt was annexed as a Roman province, not a regular province, but Octavian's personal property. He became pharaoh of Egypt, ruler of the richest territory in the Mediterranean. Cleopatra's 3 surviving children were taken to Rome. They were placed in the household of Octavia Minor, Octavian's sister and Mark Antony's former wife, the same woman Antony had abandoned for Cleopatra. Imagine that. Imagine being an Egyptian princess, raised in a golden palace, promised kingdoms and thrones. And now you're living in the home of your father's scorned ex-wife, in the city of your mother's enemies, surrounded by people who hate everything you represent. The twins were paraded in Octavian's triumph in 29 BC. Golden chains so heavy they could barely walk, dressed as the sun and moon as a cruel joke on their names, forced to march behind a wax figure of their dead mother. The Roman crowd was moved to pity, just as they had been with Arsinoe years before. They cried out for mercy. Octavian spared them. Alexander Helios and Ptolemy Philadelphus disappear from the historical record shortly after. They probably died young. Whether from illness or something more deliberate, no one knows. Ancient sources simply stop mentioning them. Only Cleopatra Selene survived to adulthood. Around 25 BC, she was married to Juba II, the king of Mauritania, modern Algeria and Morocco. Another orphan, another child whose parents had been destroyed by Rome. Together,
They ruled for 20 years. Cleopatra Selene minted coins showing Egyptian crocodiles. She named her son Ptolemy. She never forgot who she was or where she came from.
She was the last of Cleopatra's children, and through her, the bloodline of the Ptolemies survived, eventually producing ancestors of 3 Roman emperors, Claudius, Caligula, and Nero. Here's what they don't teach you about Cleopatra. They tell you she was a seductress, that she used her beauty to manipulate powerful men, that she was an exotic temptress who corrupted good Romans. This is Roman propaganda, written by the winners, written by men who needed to explain how a woman, a foreign woman, had nearly brought their republic to its knees. The real Cleopatra was a brilliant strategist. She spoke 9 languages. She was the first Ptolemaic ruler in 3 centuries to bother learning Egyptian. She managed an economy that produced more revenue than any of her predecessors. She survived assassination attempts, civil wars, and family betrayals from the age of 18. And in the end, she made one final choice that denied Octavian his ultimate victory. She refused to be led in triumph. She refused to let Rome use her body as a symbol of their power. She chose death on her own terms, dressed in her royal robes, lying on a golden couch with her crown on her head. Her children paid the price. The twins dragged through Roman streets, her eldest son murdered, her youngest son erased from history. But Cleopatra, she died a queen, and 2,000 years later, we still remember her name. While Octavian, the man who destroyed her, is mostly remembered as Augustus, an administrative title. A footnote. Cleopatra won the only war that matters, the war for history. If this video disturbed you, good, because the story of Cleopatra isn't ancient history. It's a story about power, propaganda, and what empires do to the people who resist them. And that story never ends.